Sahih Bukhari 6.60, narrated by Ibn az-Zubair. I said to Uthman, this verse, which is in Surah Al-Baqarah, those of you who die and leave wives behind, without turning them out, has been abrogated by another verse. Why then do you write it in the Quran? Uthman said, leave it where it is, O son of my brother, for I will not shift anything of it, i.e. the Quran, from its original position. Here we see that Ibn Zubair and Uthman disagreed over whether or not a particular verse should be included in the Quran. Ibn Zubair believed that the verse had been abrogated and therefore should be removed from the Quran, while Uthman was insistent that the verse should remain. Uthman had his way, and so this verse is in the Quran today. Again, in the next hadith, we see how Uthman had control over the final state of the text of the Quran. Sahih al-Bukhari 8.817, narrated by Umar ibn al-Khattab. Allah sent Muhammad with the truth and revealed the holy book to him. And among what Allah revealed was the verse of the rajm, the stoning of married person, male and female, who commits illegal sexual intercourse. And we did recite this verse and understood and memorized it. Allah's apostle did carry out the punishment of stoning, and so did we after him. I am afraid that after a long time has passed, somebody will say, by Allah, we do not find the verse of the rajm in Allah's book, and thus they will go astray by leaving an obligation which Allah has revealed. It is obvious that Umar was convinced that stoning an adulterer was part of the Quran and should not be removed. The modern Quran, however, does not contain these verses. So where have they gone? These verses must have been removed by those who were in charge of the text of the Quran. What is clear is that Umar remembered these verses and did not think that they should be edited out, while others obviously did. And so today they are not in the modern Quran. Here we see how the problem of having different versions of the Quran was fixed. It was fixed by Uthman, standardizing one version of the Quran and ordering that all others be burnt. Thus, even the 7 variations that Muhammad allowed were removed, and so were the other collections made by the other companions. Thus, from now on, all oral and written tradition would have to conform to Uthman's version of the Quran. A further serious impediment, which complicated the correct compilation of the Quran, is the fact that there were verses which were spoken in Medina, but were included in surahs which began in Mecca, and vice versa. Let us together ponder the following. The followers of Muhammad tell us that there were no variations between Uthman's final version and the other 6 that were destroyed, that they were burnt so that there would be no different recitations. Really? How so? If the scripts were identical, why destroy any of them? After all, they allege that the errors are in the reading of the script that contained no vowels and not in the text. If this was the case, how could Uthman's version, supposedly identical to the others, change an iota of the fact that they were still reading the same script without vowels? It is evident that only because of their extreme desperation to prove the impossible, that the followers of Muhammad unto this day resort to all subterfuge, contortions of fact and logic, mendacities, deceptions, and illogical reasoning to cover up the crystal clear fact that the Quran that they have today is most certainly not the same as the one left to them by Muhammad 1400 years ago. The problem that existed and persisted during the lifetime of Muhammad for his followers is the fact that for as long as he was alive, new revelations, whereby the omniscient Allah was nonetheless allegedly changing his mind, were very conveniently being added to and some subtracted from the earlier ones, abrogated and abrogating verses which affected 71 of the 114 surahs of the Quran. This is why, at the time of Muhammad's death, there existed no singular codex of the sacred text. It is also reported that some major parts of a surah were eaten by a domestic animal. The final text of the Quran was actually fixed in 933 AD. Since the Quran is supposed to be the word of Allah, who is the one who taught Moses the Torah, then the only and unmistakable conclusion for the enormous inconsistencies and differences between them must be because it was the later followers of Muhammad who corrupted the Quran to suit their own agenda. The criminal invariably projects upon his victim his own hatreds, shortcomings, and lack of morality and justice. So do the Arab and Muhammadan scholars. They have conspired over the centuries and even at the present to control all the information that they pass on to the believers by perpetuating the myth of the perfect and divine Quran, contrary to the historical, philological, and theological records that prove it to be otherwise. In fact, the greatest threat to Muhammadan Islam is the acquisition of knowledge, especially of the Bible, by the masses of the believers. Of 114 surahs in the Quran, only 43 were not changed. All the others had verses that were either abrogated or abrogating. This means that in the course of 23 years of Muhammad's mission, the omniscient Allah changed his mind at least 71 times. In summation, the following historical and theological facts are crystal clear and indisputable. 1. The greatest number of traditions and fetishes of the Muslims are nothing but continuance, a repackaging and Islamization of pagan rites and actions that pre-existed Muhammad and his Quran. 2. Almost all the precepts and concepts of importance in the Quran have been plagiarized, plundered, pirated and or perverted from the Hebrew Bible and scriptures, from the New Testament and Apocrypha, from pagan Arabian religion, and also from Zoroastrian religion and traditions. Abdul Fath Muhammad Shahristani, 1086 AD, in his valuable book on sects and religions, Al-Milal wal-Nihal, asserts that many of the rights and duties of Islam are continuations and practices which the pagan Arabs had adopted from the Jews. 3. Even if Muhammad were illiterate, not able to read or write, does not negate his ability to compose and recite prose and or poetry. Most of the poets of Arabia were illiterate, but masters of the spoken language. The oral, poetic tradition of the Arabs was their greatest legacy, since they left almost nothing in the form of writing, thus proving beyond a shadow of a doubt that poetry and prose in Arabia was completely independent from literacy. 4. The Quran is only a tossed salad bowl of stories, concepts and precepts, plagiarized, plundered, pirated and or perverted at will from the beliefs of other peoples to suit Muhammad's agenda of inventing a suitable scripture for his fellow pagan Arabs to equal, if not rival, those of the people of the book. No copy of any masterpiece, no matter how well done it may be, can ever equal to, let alone surpass, an original. 5. The followers of Muhammad can try their worst to obfuscate, contort, pervert and twist the facts to prove otherwise, but it is a mission impossible to accomplish. That is why, when they cannot counter the truth with facts or logic, they invariably resort to violence to silence their opponents, just as was done earlier by their mentor and perfect example, Muhammad. 6. The so-called Arabic Quran contains at least 118 words of paramount and vital importance that are actually totally foreign and are derived from Hebrew, Aramaic, Ethiopic, Syriac, Greek, Persian and Sanskrit, to name just a few. Having now read many of the hadiths and other sources, it is obvious that these Muhammadan claims regarding the incorruptibility of the Quran are, to put it mildly, an exaggeration and have no support at all from the authoritative hadiths. In fact, the hadiths record the opposite. They say that Muhammad never standardized the Quran and allowed variation, and that the early Muslims memorized the Quran slightly differently. Then Uthman and a team of others edited and standardized one version of the Quran and had all others destroyed. It is not unreasonable to assume that the collection of the Quran that Uthman made is a good record of what Muhammad recited. However, it was not the only good collection that was made, nor was it a collection made by Muhammad. In conclusion, the followers of Muhammad, contrary to all proofs and logic, reject and deny the universal records of history, the Bible, and their own hadith, but assert and believe that only the Quran is true.